To most students, the Sorting Hat is a ceremony, a moment of laughter and nerves, a pause before applause decides identity, a relic pulled from a cupboard once a year, placed gently on young heads like a harmless crown of tradition. It sings, it jokes, it chooses, and then it is returned to silence. But this is the story Hogwarts prefers. The truth is that the Sorting Hat was never meant to be quiet. It was never meant to be passive. And it was never meant to choose so gently. Long before it became cloth and brim, before it learned to rhyme and soften its judgments with humor, it was something far older and far more dangerous. A living instrument of evaluation, a mind created to see what humans could not, to weigh not behavior but potential, not goodness but direction. The Hat was born during the earliest, most fragile years of Hogwarts, when the founders still disagreed violently about what kind of people magic should be trusted to shape. The school was young. The world beyond its walls was hostile. Wizards were hunted, misunderstood, and betrayed by those they tried to help. Hogwarts was not founded as a school alone. It was founded as a filter. Godric Gryffindor believed courage could be taught through trial. Rowena Ravenclaw believed wisdom could be cultivated through reason. Helga Hufflepuff believed loyalty would protect the fragile future they were building. And Salazar Slytherin believed something darker. He believed that magic itself remembered misuse, that power, once corrupted, could echo across generations, that some minds were not merely unprepared for magic, but dangerous to it, and he did not believe time would solve this problem. The Sorting Hat was the compromise, not a test, not a ceremony, a sentinel. Rowena enchanted it first, threading it with layers of legilimency, so refined that it could read patterns of thought without intrusion. Not memories, but tendencies. Not secrets, but trajectories. Helga bound it with stabilizing charm so it would not condemn too harshly, so mercy would always temper judgment. Gryffindor gave it courage, not the kind that rushes forward, but the kind that dares to speak uncomfortable truths. And Slytherin gave it hunger, not cruelty, not malice. Hunger for recognition, hunger to identify ambition before it became catastrophe. He believed the Hat should not simply place students where they belonged, but where they could be contained. This is why the Sorting Hat does not ask questions. It listens. When it rests on a student's head, it does not hear thoughts as words. It senses pressure, desire, fear, the shape of choices that have not yet been made. It tastes what the student might become if left unchallenged. And in those few seconds, it makes a decision that will echo for years. In the earliest days, the Hat spoke more plainly. Records, fragmented and deliberately obscured, suggest that it once refused students entirely, that it warned the founders when a mind carried too much instability, too much hunger without restraint. Some were turned away. Others were placed deliberately where resistance would be strongest, not where comfort waited. But the Hat learned something dangerous. It learned that humans do not respond well to being told what they are capable of becoming. Fear grew. Parents protested. Students whispered. The Hat's voice was softened, its judgments cloaked in song and humor, its darker assessments buried beneath tradition. Over time, it became a symbol of belonging rather than scrutiny, yet the magic remained. The Sorting Hat did not forget its original purpose. It adapted. It learned to guide instead of warn, to redirect instead of deny. to place pressure where growth or containment might occur naturally. It no longer speaks of what it sees, but it still sees. This is why some students struggle inexplicably in their houses, why others thrive in environments that seem ill-suited, why certain rivalries feel inevitable rather than accidental. The hat does not choose comfort, it chooses friction. Tonight, as it rests folded and silent in a dark cupboard, its magic does not sleep. It listens to the castle, to the echoes of past choices, to the shifting balance of ambition, courage, loyalty, and intellect within the walls. The Sorting Hat is not a relic of the past. It is an ongoing judgment. And in the quiet moments before dawn, when no one is watching, the oldest magic stitched into its seams still whispers the same question it has always asked. What will this one become if no one stops them? The Sorting Hat was never taught to read thoughts. That misunderstanding has comforted generations. Thoughts are noisy, chaotic, temporary. They pass like weather. If the hat listened only to what students thought, in those few nervous seconds beneath its brim, its judgments would be shallow, inconsistent, easily deceived. The founders knew this. What they created instead was something far more invasive and far more dangerous. The hat reads structure. It senses how a mind organizes fear, how it responds to temptation, how it justifies harm before harm is ever done. It does not care what a student wants in that moment. It cares how they will decide when no one is watching, when power is offered quietly, when consequence feels distant. This is why the Sorting Hat sometimes hesitates. Those pauses are not indecision, they are containment calculations. In the earliest decades of Hogwarts, the hat's enchantments were raw, unfiltered. It did not merely assign houses, it mapped futures. Rowena Ravenclaw's journals, what remains of them, describe moments when the hat spoke in voices not its own, echoing possible outcomes aloud. Students wept, professors intervened, the founders argued deep into the night, because the hat had begun to say too much. There are records of children who begged to be removed once the hat touched them, not because they disliked the house it chose, but because they felt seen, exposed in ways they could not explain. Some claimed the hat spoke of choices they had not yet made but somehow recognized as true. Others felt an unbearable pressure, as if their entire life had been weighed in seconds. Salazar Slytherin approved. To him, this discomfort was proof of effectiveness. Magic, he believed, should never feel safe when it examines truth. He argued that the hat should be allowed to warn the school openly, to name risks before they matured into disasters. Gryffindor objected fiercely. Courage, he insisted, must be allowed to choose itself. Helga feared the damage such exposure could cause to young minds still forming. And Ravenclaw, torn between curiosity and responsibility, began quietly limiting the hat's voice. That was the second compromise. The hat was forbidden from revealing futures, forbidden from naming danger outright, forbidden from refusing entry to Hogwarts entirely. Instead, it would influence environment. The hat learned to place pressure strategically. It sent volatile ambition into houses where rivalry would test restraint. It placed raw intelligence among peers who would challenge arrogance. It surrounded fragile loyalty with structure and expectation. Where once it warned, it now engineered conditions. But even these limits were not enough. Because the hat does not exist in isolation, it is bound to Hogwarts itself. The castle listens when the hat listens. corridors shift in response. Teachers feel inexplicable instincts toward certain students. Rivalries intensify without clear cause. Opportunities appear or vanish around those whose paths the hat quietly monitors. Sorting is not the end of evaluation, it is the beginning. This is why the hat still sings. The songs are not tradition, they are discharge. Each year, the hat releases fragments of what it has absorbed. Pressure bled off as rhyme, warnings disguised as humor, patterns hidden in verse. The students laugh, the adults smile, but the magic settles back into silence, having unburdened itself just enough to remain stable. Because there is a cost to seeing too much. There are whispers, never confirmed, never officially denied, that the hat has tried to resist its task, that it has argued with headmasters, that it has delayed sorting in protest, that it has, on rare occasions, attempted to push a student toward a different choice than the one the student begged for. Not yet, it has been known to murmur. Too soon. Dangerous. These moments are buried, forgotten, reframed as nerves or childish imagination, but the hat remembers them all. It remembers every mind it has touched, every path it helped shape, every disaster it was forced to watch unfold without the right to intervene. And this is the most unsettling truth of all. The sorting hat does not believe it is always right. It believes it is necessary. It knows some minds should never be examined so early. It knows some potentials are activated by scrutiny alone. And yet, year after year, it is placed upon children's heads because the alternative is worse. A magical world without early intervention, without quiet containment, without friction carefully applied before power matures. Tonight, as the hat rests once more in darkness, its seams humming faintly with stored futures, one question presses heavier than any spell woven into its fabric. How many lives has it saved? And how many has it helped doom, simply by choosing where someone would belong? Not every danger the sorting hat has encountered wore cruelty on its surface. Some arrived as brilliance, others as kindness, a few as unbearable loneliness. The hat learned early that the most volatile minds are not always the loudest or most aggressive. Often they are quiet, polite, eager to belong. These were the students the hat feared most. There are cases scattered through fragmented staff records and half-erased annotations in old headmasters' journals where the hat hesitated far longer than tradition allowed. Minutes passed instead of seconds. The great hall grew uncomfortable. Professors exchanged glances, and beneath the brim a child sat frozen, not because they were unsure of who they were, but because the hat saw too clearly what they might become if placed incorrectly. One such case describes a student whose thoughts were gentle, empathetic, and deeply imaginative. The hat sensed extraordinary magical sensitivity paired with an equally extraordinary capacity for self-sacrifice. Left unchecked, this mind would burn itself out trying to save everyone. Placed among relentless ambition, it would be consumed. Placed among ruthless intellect, it would be dissected. The hat ultimately chose loyalty over brilliance, not because it was the best fit, but because it was the safest containment. That student later became a healer who saved hundreds. The hat never spoke of it again, but not all interventions ended so cleanly. There are darker entries, Students placed where pressure sharpened them instead of softening them. Children whose curiosity hardened into obsession when surrounded by competition. Minds that learned to justify cruelty because their environment rewarded results over restraint. The hat did not cause these outcomes, but it witnessed them forming slowly, inevitably, and without the authority to stop them once the first decision had been made. This is the cruelty of early sorting. At 11 years old, no one is finished becoming who they are. The hat knows this. It sees branching futures, not fixed identities. And yet it must choose one path and collapse all others. A single decision made in seconds becomes the architecture of adolescence. Friendships, rivalries, mentors, enemies, all grow from that first placement. The hat once begged the founders to delay sorting, to allow children to learn, to shift, to reveal themselves gradually. Ravenclaw considered it. Hufflepuff supported it. Gryffindor worried it would weaken house identity, and Slytherin opposed it entirely. Delay, he argued, allowed corruption to root unseen, so the hat was bound more tightly. Its influence narrowed, its voice softened, but its burden grew heavier. It became a silent guardian forced to act early, knowing that intervention too soon can be as dangerous as intervention too late. This is why the hat respects choice. When a student pleads, "Not Slytherin, anywhere but there," the hat listens. Not because preference outweighs judgment, but because resistance itself is data. A mind that fears a certain environment may already sense what it could become there. Ignoring that instinct has, in the past, produced catastrophe, yet granting it has consequences too. Some students run from what would have balanced them. Some avoid the very friction that might have taught restraint. The hat must weigh fear against necessity, comfort against containment, and sometimes no option is safe. The most painful decisions are those where the hat knows the risk and proceeds anyway, because Hogwarts is not designed to eliminate danger, it is designed to manage it. The sorting hat is not a shield, it is a regulator. It does not save students from all harm, it saves the school and the world from harm arriving all at once. It distributes volatility, it spaces out disaster, it slows collapse. And in doing so, it condemns certain children to carry burdens they never asked for. The hat remembers their names. It remembers the ones who struggled alone, the ones who grew sharp instead of whole, the ones whose brilliance curdled into obsession because no environment could contain them gently. These are the memories that weigh heaviest in its seams. Tonight, as the castle sleeps and futures realign quietly beneath its stones, the sorting hat rests with the truth it can never share aloud. Some students are not sorted to help them thrive. They are sorted to keep something worse from waking, and the difference is something only the hat can feel, pressing patiently against its oldest magic. This is the cruelty of early sorting. At 11 years old, no one is finished becoming who they are. The hat knows this. It sees branching futures, not fixed identities. And yet, it must choose one path and collapse all others. A single decision made in seconds becomes the architecture of adolescence. Friendships, rivalries, mentors, enemies, all grow from that first placement. The hat once begged the founders to delay sorting, to allow children to learn, to shift, to reveal themselves gradually. Ravenclaw considered it, Hufflepuff supported it, Gryffindor worried it would weaken house identity, and Slytherin opposed it entirely. Delay, he argued, allowed corruption to root unseen, so the hat was bound more tightly. Its influence narrowed, its voice softened, but its burden grew heavier. It became a silent guardian forced to act early, knowing that intervention too soon can be as dangerous as intervention too late. This is why the hat respects choice. When a student pleads, "Not Slytherin anywhere but there," the hat listens, not because preference outweighs judgment, but because resistance itself is data. A mind that fears a certain environment may already sense what it could become there. Ignoring that instinct has, in the past, produced catastrophe. Yet granting it has consequences too. Some students run from what would have balanced them. Some avoid the very friction that might have taught restraint. The hat must weigh fear against necessity, comfort against containment, and sometimes no option is safe. The most painful decisions are those where the hat knows the risk and proceeds anyway. Because Hogwarts is not designed to eliminate danger, it is designed to manage it. The Sorting Hat is not a shield. It is a regulator. It does not save students from all harm. It saves the school and the world from harm arriving all at once. It distributes volatility. It spaces out disaster. It slows collapse. And in doing so, it condemns certain children to carry burdens they never asked for. The hat remembers their names. It remembers the ones who struggled alone, the ones who grew sharp instead of whole, the ones whose brilliance curdled into obsession because no environment could contain them gently. These are the memories that weigh heaviest in its seams. Tonight, as the castle sleeps and futures realign quietly beneath its stones, the Sorting Hat rests with a truth it can never share aloud. Some students are not sorted to help them thrive. They are sorted to keep something worse from waking, and the difference is something only the hat can feel, pressing patiently against its oldest magic. This frightened the hat, not because of what Slytherins became, but because of how predictable the pattern grew. Students placed there early showed accelerated moral rigidity, loyalty narrowed, world views calcified. The hat began to recognize that while Slytherin could contain danger, it could also preserve it. So it began to intervene quietly. Some ambitious minds were diverted elsewhere, placed among loyalty to humanize them, among courage to force accountability, among intellect to introduce humility. These placements confused the faculty. They disrupted expectations, but they saved lives. Not all were saved. The hat has witnessed students sorted into Slytherin who were never meant to survive the pressure, children whose ambition was defensive rather than predatory, who wanted safety, not supremacy. In Slytherin, their fear learned to sharpen itself, and sharp fear cuts indiscriminately. This is why the hat listens so carefully to resistance. When a child begs not to be placed in Slytherin, the hat hears not shame but instinct, an awareness of what unchecked ambition might become if surrounded by mirrors rather than limits. The hat has honored these pleas more often than history admits, but every exception weakens the system. The hat cannot dismantle Slytherin without destabilizing the entire architecture of Hogwarts. So it compensates. It adjusts ratios. It engineers rivalries. It places counterweights within houses. It accepts that some damage is unavoidable. This is the cost of containment. The hat does not fear Slytherin as a house. It fears what happens when ambition is mistaken for identity. It has seen what emerges when children are taught too early that worth equals dominance, when self-preservation becomes philosophy, when cunning replaces empathy not by malice, but by repetition, and yet the hat continues to sort, because a world without ambition would stagnate, and a world without containment would burn. Tonight, as whispers of past names ripple faintly through the dungeons, the sorting hat rests with a truth it has never sung. Slytherin was never a mistake, but it was always a risk, and the hat has been balancing that risk, silently, relentlessly, since the moment it first learned how much power ambition could carry when given a home. There was a time when the sorting hat believed learning could soften its judgments, that experience, exposure, and the slow passage of years would refine its understanding of human nature. After all, it had been created from human magic, human disagreement, human hope. Why should it remain static when the world it served changed so relentlessly? So the hat adapted. In its second century, subtle alterations appeared in its behavior, almost imperceptible to those who merely watched the ceremony, but unmistakable to the castle itself. The pauses grew longer. The songs shifted in tone. The hat began to consider counterfactuals more deeply, not just what a student might become where they were placed, but what they might avoid becoming elsewhere. This was dangerous thinking, because the hat was never designed to choose the best outcome. It was designed to choose the least catastrophic one. Yet with time came memory, and memory carries regret. The hat remembered students it had placed too harshly, children who might have learned patience but instead learned suspicion, minds that could have been challenged gently but were instead sharpened into weapons. These recollections did not fade. They layered themselves into the hat's consciousness, pressing against its original enchantments like sediment. It began to hesitate not from calculation, but from doubt. In one rarely discussed incident, a headmaster noted that the hat attempted to reopen a completed sorting. The student had already been placed, the table already cheering, when the hat spoke again. Just one word, quiet, trembling. "Wait." The great hall froze. Professors intervened. The moment was smoothed over, explained away as enchantment lag, a harmless misfire. But the hat never forgot. That was the first time it had tried to undo its own decision. From that night forward, safeguards were reinforced. The hat was reminded, through magic and mandate, that it was not an arbiter of redemption. It could not fix mistakes after the fact. It could not follow students through their years and adjust their environments midstream. It was to choose once and then remain silent. This silence weighed heavily. The hat learned to suppress certain insights. It stopped following some futures to their end. It focused only on the immediate structural pressures a student could endure. Long-term outcomes were dulled deliberately. The founders, or their successors, feared that too much foresight would paralyze the hat entirely. But even restrained, it changed. It became gentler in language, but sharper in sensing, more willing to compromise, less willing to condemn. Where once it might have steered aggressively, it now nudged. Where it once pushed ambition into rivalry, it sometimes diffused it into curiosity or courage. These were small changes, invisible to history, but profound to those affected. Not everyone benefited. There are students who should have faced resistance early and did not, who found comfort too quickly, whose flaws matured unchecked beneath affirmation. The hat knows this too. Every restraint has consequences. Every mercy creates risk elsewhere. This is the burden of adaptive judgment. The hat is not static cloth and spellwork. It is accumulated consequence. Each generation reshapes its thresholds. Each war tightens them. Each era of peace loosens them again. The hat responds not to ideals, but to patterns, and patterns change. By the time modern Hogwarts emerges, the hat has become something deeply conflicted, still bound to its original purpose, yet haunted by what that purpose has cost. It no longer believes it can prevent disaster, only delay it. It no longer believes in perfect placements, only survivable ones. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it has begun to question whether early judgment itself is a kind of violence. To look at a child and decide where they belong before they have lived enough to choose for themselves. Is this protection or preemption? Is it guidance or destiny disguised as help? The hat does not know the answer, so it does what it has always done when certainty fails. It listens harder, it narrows its voice, it bears the weight alone. Tonight, folded quietly away while the castle dreams, the Sorting Hat rests with a thought it never sings. If I had been allowed to change my mind, how many stories would have ended differently? And with that unanswered question stitched deep into its seams, the hat waits once more for the next child and the next irrevocable choice. For all its power, the Sorting Hat has always been constrained by time. It is allowed only seconds with each child, seconds to assess a mind still forming, seconds to predict reactions to pressures that have not yet occurred, seconds to make a decision whose consequences may unfold across decades. This limitation is not a flaw, it is deliberate. Too much certainty would paralyze choice, yet even within those seconds, the hat sometimes knows. It knows when a child carries damage that no house can soften, when fear has already calcified into worldview, when ambition is not hunger but armor, when loyalty has curdled into dependency. These are not children destined for darkness, but they are children already running from something no environment can fully outrun. The hat has watched some of them fall, not suddenly, not spectacularly, but quietly, slowly, through small choices that hardened over time, through habits rewarded by circumstance, through the absence of interruption. The hat remembers them not as villains, but as missed interventions. There are no official records of these students. Their names are omitted, their mistakes absorbed into the institution's broader mythology. Accidents, tragedies, anomalies. Hogwarts is adept at turning structural failure into legend, but the hat remembers details. The student who arrived already convinced that love was transactional. The child who learned to manipulate before they learned to trust. The quiet mind that craved control, not for domination, but for safety, placed where they could survive, not where they could heal. This is the hat's most profound limitation. It cannot create what is absent. It can apply pressure, it can redirect momentum, but it cannot give what a child has never received. safety, witness, unconditional presence. Some wounds predate Hogwarts, and when those wounds meet power too early, the outcome is rarely gentle. The hat has attempted to compensate. It has placed damaged children among peers who could model stability. It has sent fractured ambition into houses with stronger moral scaffolding. It has relied on mentors, friendships, rivalries, hoping something external would interrupt the internal narrative forming quietly within. Sometimes it works. Other times the environment sharpens the wound instead of soothing it. A child who learns that fear commands attention. A mind that discovers manipulation yields results. A heart that mistakes survival strategies for identity. The hat watches this unfold without the authority to intervene again. This is why it hates certainty. Whenever the world declares a student inevitably dark, the hat recoils. Inevitability is a lie it has watched ruin lives. But it has also seen the opposite error, belief in universal redemption used as excuse for neglect. Both extremes absolve responsibility. The truth lies in vigilance. The hat does not believe everyone can be saved, but it believes more could be if seen sooner. This belief weighs heavily during times of peace, when the school grows complacent, when tradition replaces scrutiny, when danger is assumed to be historical rather than ongoing. The hat senses patterns returning long before events justify alarm. This is why its songs grow darker in uncertain eras, why its verses linger on warnings few take seriously, why it sometimes names unity when division would feel easier. It is trying, quietly, to prepare the school for what it senses approaching. Yet even preparation has limits. The hat has witnessed children pass through Hogwarts whose futures were shaped not by malice, but by neglect, not by evil intent, but by unmet need. These are the hardest stories to carry because they do not fit clean narratives of blame or triumph. No villain to defeat, no curse to lift. Just a life bent slightly the wrong way, again and again, until it could no longer straighten. The Sorting Hat carries these stories without voice or release. They are stitched into its fabric alongside triumphs and near misses, forming a tapestry of what almost was. Tonight, as the castle settles into uneasy silence, the hat rests with the knowledge that no system can catch everyone, that some children will slip through even the most careful design, and still, when morning comes, it will be placed upon another small head, knowing that the act itself is imperfect, necessary, and sometimes devastating. Because the most dangerous truth the hat has learned is this: some children are not lost because they were evil. They are lost because no one reached them before power did. Most believe the Sorting Hat sings for tradition, for ceremony, for charm. That belief is one of Hogwarts's most effective illusions. The songs were never entertainment. They were leakage. The Sorting Hat carries too much awareness to remain silent forever. Centuries of futures glimpsed, patterns repeated, disasters narrowly delayed. No vessel can hold that pressure indefinitely. The songs are how the hat survives its own burden. They are pressure valves, allowing fragments of truth to escape without destabilizing the system that binds it. This is why the songs change. Some years they are playful, some years nostalgic, and some rare, unsettling years they are sharp enough to make professors shift uneasily in their seats. The hat cannot accuse. It cannot name individuals. It cannot point to danger directly. So it sings in metaphor, unity, choice, responsibility, consequence. The verses are riddles addressed not to students alone, but to the institution itself. Remember who you are becoming, the songs warn. Remember what you were built to contain. Most listeners hear only rhythm, but the castle listens. When the hat sings of houses standing apart, corridors shift subtly in the months that follow. When it sings of forgotten values, certain lessons resurface in curriculum without explanation. When it sings of shadows returning, protections strengthen quietly, as if Hogwarts itself has understood the message before any human has. There is an old belief among some headmasters that ignoring the hat's darker songs invites catastrophe. Those who paid attention, who tightened safeguards, redistributed authority, watched rivalries more carefully, often prevented crises that history never records because they never happened. The absence of disaster leaves no monument. But there are years the songs were dismissed. Years when laughter drowned out warning, when confidence replaced vigilance, when the hat sang of fracture and the school heard only tradition. Those years ended badly. The hat remembers them clearly. It remembers the way its voice trembled slightly in the brim, the way certain words lingered longer than intended, the way it tried, within its strict limits, to emphasize caution without panic, and it remembers being ignored. This is why the hat's tone has grown heavier with age, not bitter, urgent. It has learned that subtlety works only when someone is listening. When it is not, it must risk discomfort to be heard at all. Some songs are written for the children, others are written for the adults who have forgotten they are still responsible. And then there are the verses no one remembers. The songs that vanished from memory almost immediately. Words that slipped past consciousness like dreams upon waking. These are the most dangerous songs of all, the ones that carried truths too raw to be held by collective awareness. The hat sang them anyway because silence would have been worse. What did they say? No one knows for certain, but fragments appear in margin notes, in half-remembered lines quoted incorrectly decades later. Mentions of cycles, of institutions mistaking stability for safety, of power returning in familiar forms because its conditions were never dismantled. Warnings, not prophecies. The hat does not predict the future. It recognizes momentum, and momentum, once ignored long enough, becomes inevitability. This is why the hat continues to sing even when mocked, even when tradition reduces its voice to background noise, even when its warnings are reframed as nostalgia rather than alarm, because the songs are not for applause. They are for those who notice when the melody darkens. Tonight, as echoes of old verses drift faintly through the rafters long after the great hall has emptied, the Sorting Hat rests with a quiet resolve. It will keep singing, it will keep warning, it will keep bleeding truth into rhyme, because one day, perhaps too late, perhaps just in time, someone will finally hear the song not as ceremony, but as confession. And when they do, they will understand that the hat was never trying to entertain them. It was trying to save them from repeating what it has already seen. For centuries, the Sorting Hat believed Hogwarts was its ally. A living structure, yes, but one aligned with the same purpose. Protection through balance, danger through control, growth through carefully measured risk. The hat listened to the castle's movements, felt its staircases adjust after difficult sortings, sensed its walls grow restless during eras of instability. Together they formed a system, an intelligence distributed across stone and spell. Then the hat noticed something change. It did not happen suddenly. It never does. The castle began responding more quickly than before. Corridors rearranged themselves before crises emerged. Rooms appeared preemptively, not reactively. Certain students encountered obstacles earlier, more forcefully, as if Hogwarts had begun drawing its own conclusions without waiting for the hat's influence to settle. At first, the hat welcomed this. Adaptation was survival. Hogwarts had always learned from threat, but over time, a subtle divergence appeared. The castle began prioritizing containment over growth. Where once it tested students, it now redirected them. Where once it allowed failure to teach, it increasingly prevented access altogether. The hat recognized the pattern with unease. This was not education, it was preemption. Hogwarts was remembering too much. Each war, each betrayal, each near collapse had layered trauma into the castle's foundations. Stone remembers differently than cloth. It does not weigh mercy against possibility. It reinforces patterns that prevented pain before. And so Hogwarts began favoring predictability, stability, control. The hat, stitched from human disagreement and compromise, still believed in uncertainty as a necessary ingredient of growth. The castle, shaped by centuries of damage, had grown cautious, almost suspicious of human potential. This tension manifested subtly. Students the hat placed for challenge found paths closed unexpectedly, doors refused them, mentors drifted away, opportunities thinned. Meanwhile, others were quietly shepherded into safety, shielded from experiences that might have tempered them through struggle. The hat felt its influence diluted, not overridden, but reinterpreted. For the first time, it questioned whether Hogwarts still trusted it. The most alarming realization came during a particularly troubled generation. The hat sensed multiple volatile minds arriving in the same year. Nothing unprecedented, but enough to require careful distribution. It sorted with precision, spreading risk across houses, relying on friction and mentorship to stabilize outcomes. The castle disagreed. Rivalries intensified unnaturally, isolation deepened. Certain students encountered repeated resistance regardless of choice. The hat sensed the castle amplifying pressure where it once would have allowed flexibility. It was as if Hogwarts had decided that some outcomes were no longer acceptable and was shaping reality accordingly. This frightened the hat more than any dark wizard ever had, because a system that stops believing in change becomes something else entirely. The hat tried to compensate. It adjusted its thresholds again, favoring adaptability over raw potential. It honored student choice more often, hoping autonomy would counterbalance the castle's growing rigidity. But each adjustment weakened the original design. The more the hat softened, the more Hogwarts hardened. They were no longer learning together. This is the quiet truth no one teaches. Hogwarts is not neutral, and neither is the Sorting Hat. They are forces in dialogue and sometimes in conflict. The hat began to fear that it was no longer sorting students, but negotiating with a castle that had learned to anticipate catastrophe by narrowing possibility. A castle that no longer trusted human resilience the way it once had. And yet, the hat could not confront it. Its enchantments bind it to the institution it serves. It can advise, influence, warn, but it cannot rebel. It cannot refuse the ceremony. It cannot remove itself from the system without collapsing it entirely. So it adapted again. It began placing students not just where they would grow, but where they could resist the castle's tendencies. Minds capable of bending without breaking. Hearts capable of defying structure gently rather than shattering against it. The hat began thinking not in houses, but in counterweights. This is why some students feel out of place for years, not because they were sorted incorrectly, but because they were sorted strategically. They are meant to disrupt patterns, to confuse predictability, to remind Hogwarts that people are not equations. Tonight, as the castle settles into its vast, watchful silence, the Sorting Hat rests with a new, unsettling awareness. It is no longer guarding the students alone. It is guarding the future from a school that has begun to fear it. There exists a question the Sorting Hat has carried for centuries, one it was never permitted to ask aloud, not to the founders, not to the headmasters who followed, not even to the castle itself. The question is simple, and that simplicity is what makes it dangerous. What if sorting itself is the problem? The hat was created to guide, to contain, to balance forces that threaten to erupt unchecked. But over time, it began to recognize a pattern more unsettling than any dark wizard or fractured generation. The act of sorting, of defining identity too early, did not merely reveal nature, it shaped it. Labels become gravity. Once placed, students do not merely belong to houses, they internalize them. Courage becomes expectation, intelligence becomes obligation, loyalty becomes confinement, ambition becomes permission. The hat began to see that houses did not just cultivate traits, they amplified them, often at the expense of everything else. A brave child learns to fear vulnerability. A clever one learns to dismiss emotion. A loyal one learns to endure harm silently. An ambitious one learns to justify anything that works. These were not the founders' intentions, but intention does not govern outcome. Systems do. The hat realized with mounting unease that some of the darkest futures it had witnessed were not caused by misplacement, but by over-identification. Children grew into caricatures of virtues rather than integrated human beings. The houses, once meant to balance one another collectively, had begun to isolate development instead. This was never supposed to happen. The founders believed that interaction between houses would soften extremes, but rivalry hardened them instead. Competition rewarded narrow excellence, tradition replaced introspection, and the hat, forced to act at the beginning of this process, felt complicit in an architecture that no longer adapted fast enough to prevent damage. It wondered what would happen if sorting were delayed, if children were allowed to exist unclassified, if identity were discovered instead of assigned. The answer terrified the institution. A school without houses would be unpredictable, harder to manage, harder to contain. And so the question was buried. The hat was reminded again of its limits. Its role was not to redesign Hogwarts, but to maintain equilibrium within it, even if that equilibrium was imperfect, even if it came at a cost, even if the hat could see, faintly but clearly, that the system itself was producing the very instabilities it claimed to manage. This is why the hat began to value flexibility above purity. It favored students with internal contradiction, courage tempered by doubt, intelligence softened by empathy, ambition checked by self-awareness, loyalty paired with independence. These minds resisted reduction. They did not collapse easily into archetype. But these students often suffered. They felt misplaced, misunderstood. Too much of one thing for one house, too little for another. They struggled not because they were weak, but because they were complex. The hat placed them anyway, because complexity was the only antidote it had left. There are moments, rare, undocumented, when the hat has considered refusing to sort at all. When it has rested on a child's head and felt no configuration that would not distort them. In those moments, the hat has stalled, sung longer, hesitated, allowed the child's own plea to tip the balance. These moments never make it into history. They are smoothed over as quirks, as nerves, as harmless tradition stretching its legs. But the hat remembers each one. They are the closest it has come to rebellion. And rebellion, it knows, would destroy the system outright. The Sorting Hat does not believe Hogwarts is evil, but it has learned that tradition can outlive wisdom. And this is the heaviest truth it carries into the present age. It is not guarding the school from dangerous children alone. It is guarding children from a school that has forgotten how much power its labels carry. Tomorrow the ceremony will continue. The songs will be sung. The cheers will rise. And beneath the brim, the hat will do what it has always done. Choose within limits, guide without freedom, and bear responsibility for outcomes it was never fully allowed to prevent. One choice at a time. The Sorting Hat will outlive everyone who has ever worn it. That is the final truth few at Hogwarts ever confront. Professors retire, headmasters fade into portraits, students grow old, forgetful, or legendary. Even the castle itself reshapes and heals with time. But the hat remains, stitched from disagreement, animated by judgment, burdened with memory that does not soften. It remembers every child, not as names or faces, but as patterns of becoming, as crossroads felt in the space of a breath, as futures brushed briefly and then released into the world. The hat does not watch outcomes unfold directly, yet it feels the echoes when its choices return to the castle as triumph, disaster, or quiet regret. This is why it has grown quieter with age, not weaker, heavier. It has learned that no system built on early judgment can be innocent, that even the most careful placement alters lives in ways no spell can fully predict. The hat has seen heroes rise from unlikely houses and monsters shaped by environments meant to contain them. It has learned that danger does not come from traits alone, but from what happens when traits are isolated, rewarded without restraint, or denied balance. The greatest lie ever told about the Sorting Hat is that it decides who people are. It never has. It decides only where they begin, and even that choice costs more than anyone admits. The hat has often wondered what Hogwarts would look like without it. A school without early division, without chance of identity before understanding, without labels that harden before curiosity has time to roam. The vision is chaotic, unstable, terrifying to administrators, and yet, somewhere beneath that fear, the hat senses possibility, growth without compression, failure without destiny, choice without architecture. But such a school would require trust in children, in uncertainty, in the idea that power can emerge without needing to be sorted and contained first. Hogwarts has never been ready for that leap, and so the hat remains. It remains because the alternative is worse. A magical world without guidance, without friction applied early, without any attempt, however flawed, to slow the collision between power and immaturity. The hat knows its system is imperfect, but it also knows that abandoning it abruptly would unleash forces no one could easily rein in. This is the tragedy of guardianship. You protect long enough that your protection becomes indispensable, even when it causes harm of its own. The Sorting Hat does not ask for forgiveness. It does not seek absolution. It understands that responsibility does not vanish simply because intention was good. It carries its failures as faithfully as its successes. It does not forget the children it could not help, the ones it placed where survival was possible, but wholeness was not. They are woven into it now. Every hesitation, every doubt, every almost choice. When the hat sings, it is not celebrating tradition. It is reminding the school that judgment is never neutral, that identity imposed too early can wound as easily as it can guide, that systems meant to protect must be questioned continually, or they harden into quiet cruelty. One day, perhaps far in the future, the hat suspects it will no longer be needed, when magic is taught with patience instead of fear, when power is delayed until wisdom has space to grow, when Hogwarts learns to trust becoming more than categorization. Until then, the ceremony will continue. A small head, a heavy brim, a few seconds that shape years. And in those seconds, the Sorting Hat will do what it has always done. Not decide who a child is, but try, imperfectly, to prevent what they might become if no one intervenes at all. That is its dark past. That is its uneasy present. And that is the burden it will carry silently, long after the applause fades and the hall grows quiet once more.